Usually the first thing that you do is you go into clean all the noise that you don't really need on the final result. So if we have those little flying parts, it is a good idea to remove them. So there are multiple ways to do this. So first of all, when you're finalizing the result, you can of course always set in the settings filtering by size and either leave the biggest part or remove parts smaller than a certain amount. But I usually deactivate this just to see what I get as a final result, and then I can use a separate tool, which is the same tool that we have in finalization settings. This is the filtering by size, there it is. And I can click leave the biggest part. This one is apparently biggest and it will be left behind. Or I can remove parts smaller than a certain size. So all these parts, all these small flying parts, they are of course most likely smaller than 2,000 frames, 2,000 polygons. So if I switch to wireframe view, you can see that these are actually like enclosed pieces of mesh. I'm going to zoom out, switch back to the shaded view, and I can of course easily filter them out by leaving the biggest part, or I can use the tool which is called magic wand. I can click on the object and see that this object is being selected but not all other pieces. And now I can click Control I, which inverts selection, so everything that was selected before is now deselected and vice versa. So if I zoom in, you'll see that those little parts, they are now selected. And I can just click delete. Or I'm clicking Control Z just to get back a little, or I can use remove parts smaller than a certain amount. I click apply and they are filtered out. So it is important for our next tool, which we're going to use, is holes. So when you fill in holes, it will show you all the holes that are open. And if you have lots of flying parts around, most likely these are open parts of mesh, and they also contain holes, which we don't have to fill really. So here is a little hole that I missed when I've been scanning this object, but we deal with this in a few moments. So I cancel this for now. What I just want to point out is that if we move to this one, the bigger object, it might be dangerous to use filtering by size. Like if I leave the biggest part over here, most likely this table will be a bigger part, because in this case I think these are two separate parts. So if I take magic wand tool, click on the object, you can see that only the object is being selected. It is because this object doesn't touch these two tables. So you can see that we have little gaps here between the object and the table. And it doesn't happen all the time, but it's quite common nonetheless. So in many cases, you will see this gap between the object and the table after finalization. And sometimes you can just select the object, but this object will not be the biggest on the on this model. So if I invert selection, I'm clicking Control I, you can see all those all these combinations over here. So if you go into selection menu, let me move this one for a little. So if you go into selection settings, you can see that you can click Control I to invert selection. Okay, I'm going to close this one for now. And I have selected something that I don't need. So here is my object. I can invert selection by clicking Control I and just delete everything else. Okay. So now to the holes. You can see that on this one, I didn't fill holes at all. So we have quite a lot of them. And if I go to the hole selection tool, you can see that I have a list of holes here. And they are sorted by size. So the first hole will be the biggest. If I click on it, I can see it. Well, this is this hole over here. Or I can select a hole just on the preview. So I can click over here and it's being selected over there. So I can, of course, select any of these holes. So if I just select smaller holes, let's say these little holes over there. I can just select them and fill them. They will be filled. But also in many cases, what you need is to segment the hole. So sometimes these corners might be filled incorrectly. So it might be a good idea to make a bridge over here. So we have a special tool here called bridge. And I can connect, let's say, this point and this point over here, and they create this little bridge of polygons. If I click accept, I can see that now this hole is segmented into two holes. So if I go back to hole filling, you'll see that this hole will be separate and I can fill it separately. I can click accept changes and this hole will be filled. And of course I can, in the same way, fill all other holes. So I can just select them and click accept. So these holes will be filled. All right. Or I can go to the settings during finalization and just click fill all holes for me. But sometimes if you have bigger holes, they might be filled in a kind of strange way. So it's better to use radius option with a healthy value. If it's Calibry, it's like 3 to 5 millimeters. If it's Calibry Mini, it's like 1 or 2 millimeters. And then if you have bigger holes, you can decide all by your own what you want to do with those holes. Sometimes you don't even need to fill those holes at all because it is extrapolated data. And if you do this for reverse engineering purposes, for example, it's not a good idea to fill all the holes. But in this case, I can do this. So I'm going to fill all the holes, and here is this hole that I want to fill. I'm clicking, and we now have airtight model. So if I click on it, I see no holes anymore. All right, so these are bridges, hole filling, and filtering tools. We also have smooth tools here. So if I want to smooth out, so for example, I think that this area here is too rough, I can take a smooth tool, change the size of the smooth brush by scrolling my mouse wheel, and just apply this tool to a certain area. And you can see that it's now being smoothed out, this area that I use it to. But you have to be careful with this tool because you can use it in the areas where you're just going to lose a certain amount of data, a certain amount of sharpness that you might need. So I click accept in this case. And yeah, that's it. Now we go into other set of tools which changes the polygonal mesh.